Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so this is the first of our bi-monthly design group meetings, which will explain how that works, because there's some people that have obviously been on the calls before, and others that are new to it. And I can see a lot of people that have been supporting us on the roundtable workshops as well, which is fantastic. Daz, do you want me to open up and just give an update as to what's been happening on the Golden Thread initiative and the like?
I think that'd be great, George. Like I said, I'm not sure within the team here who has or who hasn't been involved. So I think that'll be really good. Just give an overview, and then I will try and give a bit of an overview of what we started off like a year or so ago, and then kind of more of a dot as to how we do going forward. Because I think it'll be great to get everyone's input. But I'll try and kind of give a summary of what we did like before and what we're aiming to maybe do now. But if you could frame that, that'd be great, George.
Great. Okay. I mean, with apologies to people like Jim and Paula and Mark, who have seen elements of what I'm going to show, and Paul as well. So I'll skip through those fairly quickly, but I think it's important that we all get up to speed with to the same level, if that's okay. Right. Okay. Because we've had a lot going on, to say the least. I'm just going to put in context where we've come from with this. Daz and myself and Aaron Miller and Daventures started on this sort of initiative almost 3.5 years ago now, where we were finding that there's a lot of people, in particular the social landlords, that didn't really know what BIM meant for them and how relevant it was going to be. So we held this workshop back in November 2018. We had over 100 people come to it, and it was really great because we got a lot of people asking questions in the crowd as to, what is BIM? How's it going to work for us? And they were actually answering each other's questions. So that's where we got the idea of having this sort of collaborative approach. And Jack Ostrovsky, when he was at Notting Hill Genesis, he gave us some very practical examples. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. This was something that Daz can talk about a bit later, but he was basically just illustrating the different stages of a development. And then Jack gave an example of a particular apartment where the customer was without heating, without central heating for almost 2 years, because they were trying to find the source of the problem that was causing the issue. And as they dug around, they found that the record information, there's no block number, no flat number, no cross references to schematics. So it was extremely difficult for the maintenance people to find out what the cause of the problem was. And they then ended up with schematics that weren't referenced to the flats. And as Jack put on here, it was a real Where's Wally to try and find things. And the overall result of that was that they eventually got it sorted, but it was clear that there was information that was relevant to compliance that was not being structured properly, certainly preventative maintenance, and also cyclical work as well. So from an asset management point of view, the information that was being delivered through the design and construction process was weak. And therefore, what we needed to do was actually have much better structured data. I think this is quite a tangible example of things. Devonshire's then gave some illustrations of things that had actually led to legal issues and the sorts of defects and things. So that's where we started with. And through those workshops, we compiled questions that the teams were asking to actually produce that sort of communication. We were then asked to take over responsibility for BIM4Housing about 18 months ago. So we took that same approach and said, really, what BIM is about is better information management, which the UK BIM Alliance has now adopted as well. So it means that we're then looking at things from a point of view of what's important to developers, to people that are involved in design, construction, manufacturing, advisory. So we created these different working groups, and this is the design group that we're working with here. And what the purpose of this design group is actually to identify things that are real problems that are that need addressing, but also things that need maybe clients to change the way they're asking for things, or the construction teams, the way they respond as well. So the principal idea that we're following is that no one stakeholder group can actually affect the change that's needed in isolation. We need to have a situation where we can identify within the design group the things that need addressing, and then talk to the other groups to actually come up with ways of addressing them. And we do that through work streams. So the work streams are, in theory, we've got a couple of people from each of the stakeholder groups in each work stream, and they're dealing with things like data standards, MMC, fire safety. So being able to then address these things, and the work streams have been operating over this last 18 months. And, you know, the fire safety one has been, you know, it's been growing legs. It's been very, very successful. We've also had a group for sustainability, which we're now looking to fold that into something called Zero Construct that we're supporting. And also some of the ones that I think we need to really look at now is in particular change management. So in other words, so if there are things that within your group that we can tap into here, then we can pick up any of these topics. And these work streams are very much the doing part of BIM4Housing. So they're the ones that the round tables are operating in to actually come up with solutions that we can work to. What we've also done is we've got a partnership with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which is funded by CITB and also all of these organisations. So we've got there for a professional, because at the end of the day, BIM4Housing, we're all volunteers. We've got no money. So it's really a matter of coming up with the requirements and some solutions, but then delivering those through to the supply chains needs some proper professional help. And the Supply Chain Sustainability School are actually helping us with that. All of their resources, their training material is all free to BIM4Housing members, which is tremendous. And they cover basically lots of different areas. One of the challenges that we recognised right from the beginning was that in many cases, people perceive that BIM is about the 3D model, and that therefore that is what the digital delivery is. And the challenge with that, and I guess many of you have seen this image before, but it's still worth repeating, that really BIM often will stop, or the 3D modeling anyway, will often stop at work stage 4. Yes, people might be using it for coordination going forward, but the majority of the information that is then used at a project level is in PDFs and effectively analog. So therefore, we end up with a gap in digital information at handover. We might have a 3D model, we might have some great 360 photography, but a lot of the detail, like what's the ironmongery schedule, how does it relate to the doors, etc., is often in PDFs. And the result of that is that there's then a lot of rework actually needed at the end of the project. Now, that is becoming really important because the liabilities are changing with the new legislation that's coming through, and I wasn't aware until quite recently of this Defective Premises Act, but the impact of that could be very substantial, and I think it's causing people to think very carefully about the quality of digital information that is being provided. And also, it's also the case that the HSE, the regulator, the gateway reviews, are actually going to be carried out by people who are being brought in from the oil and gas industry, where they're used to a digital record as the evidence of things being done. And if you don't have that record, then it's perceived that the work hasn't been done. And therefore, we've got to become far better at making sure that we've got evidence that things have been done properly. So we've got the obviously the various different gateways, what's happening with the legislation and the guidance. And one of the things I'm going to cover in a moment is the work that we've been doing on the golden thread. And a critical part of it is that the golden thread does need to be structured digital data. And what that really means is that why does it have to be structured and digital? And is a PDF adequate for that? Well, the answer is no, because if we're relying on an O&M contractor to, no matter how good they are, to actually chase people for documents, do you really know that you've got the information that you need in the right format? The result is that the only way of really checking is to do manual reading and validating, rather than machines helping us with that. So here, for example, we've got a specification, MBS Core specification with some great information in it, but unless the manufacturer describes their product as having fire integrity and fire insulation, there's no automated way that we can actually validate a manufacturer's product information against this requirement. And if we then look at what comes from some typical examples, the way the manufacturer provides their information is they're using terminology that doesn't match the specification, understandably, and there's good reasons for it, but it means that a person's got to manually interpret it. But the second thing is, because it's just in a document, the only way of checking that is for somebody to manually read it. And if, for example, fire rating isn't in the document, then it probably would be missed. Here we've got another manufactured product, and the way fire rating is described in this is different. And it's different again in this example. So what we need to get to is something where we're standardizing that information, and broadly in the BIM industry, we're trying to do that using IFC, but we can end up with families of information which is just attributes against objects in a BIM process. We talk about COBie, and COBie is a tremendous way of exchanging information in standardized formats. But the thing that often isn't understood is that we've got COBie type data, which is generic for any type of product, and the same with the instance data. But to actually look at what information is needed for the safety case, for example, we'd need to be making sure that we've got attributes. And therefore, we need to ensure that the attributes are being described in a standardized way. And more importantly, it's actually procured from the supply chain so that we can make sure that that's done. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is by working with BIM4Housing associations to create standardized data templates for requirements and procedures, and then enable those to then be used either for new projects or for existing buildings, to create the platform, the standardized data platforms, to be able to coordinate that. The purpose of this, really, from a BIM perspective, is often about asset management. So here we've got, if we know where the doors are and which doors are acting as fire doors, then that's really what we need from an asset management point of view. But if we know that, that same information can be used to inform the safety side of things. And increasingly, carbon is going to be the case. So therefore, if we get this process right, so we can make sure that door schedules and the spaces that those door schedules relate to, and the materials and the components and the specification of the door and the constituent parts, if they're all properly coordinated through digital records, then it means that we can satisfy three different objectives and outcomes from the same source material. So just finally, this is the work that we've been doing with the Golden Thread initiative. I've highlighted in red the various different activities that we're actually closely involved with. So, for example, we're involved with the BRE with the standardized data templater, which is being used by the Construction Products Association to get manufacturers to provide their information in standardized ways. So all of that digital information can then be procured more easily. The Housing Association Charitable Trust, where we've been working with them to create standardized asset information requirements, and obviously the GTI. So the Golden Thread initiative is led by L&Q. It's made up of 10 working groups, and people like MBS, for example, have been leading on the specification side of things. So this is looking at what do we need from a specification, what form do we need, and how do we need to provide that so that it provides that enduring golden thread through the process. We've got another group that's been working on 3D photography and records, and basically all of these different working groups. So we've all been working in our own areas, but we've been collaborating. So my responsibility has been for asset and survey information, and I'll show you the sort of thing that we've been doing on that. In particular, the way we've followed it, we had a strong steer from the health and safety executive to do things in a way that was a bit unfamiliar to me, because I'm used to looking at asset information from a point of view of what's the asset, what do I need to do to it? Whereas HSE said, no, that's not the exam question. The exam question isn't about fire doors. We're not interested in fire doors. What we're interested in is preventing the spread of fire. And if the fire door is part of that, then that's the context in which we need to know the information. So to achieve that, we started looking at what information is needed, because we consulted with people that have produced safety cases to identify what documents and information is needed, and we created a questionnaire which includes the prompts to be able to capture, record what information and documentation is needed by anybody that's putting together a safety case. We've done the same with the visual records, so that we've started to look at how we can bring together information that's probably being used for the construction process, the 3D photography, to actually then be able to use that to capture the asset information. And this has probably been the most significant thing, and I guess arguably the most important thing for the design group, and that is that the way in which design is going from descriptive to prescriptive is fundamentally changing. The gateway 2, which is at the end of work stage 4, requires that the products and materials that are going to go into the building have actually been determined at that point, which for lots of products that probably isn't an issue, but certainly for M&E and also other contractor-led designs, then we're moving into work stage 5 in many cases for that. And the approach is that's going to change. So what we've done here, this is work in progress, but the process group have done this. They've taken the gateways and then overlaid it against the REBA planner work so that we can actually see who's got to do what at which stage. And we've then, as the various different working groups, have then gone through the various different activities, and then they're relating them back to which work stage and also who's responsible for it. And you'll see here that really, if there's no evidence of something being done, then it's going to be treated as a defect. We therefore need to look at how change management is managed. So we started to look at that by saying basically, if we've got the asset information requirements where we can actually say from a digital perspective, what information do we expect product manufacturers to provide, that can then be tested before we go too far. It means that you can start to capture that information early. So therefore, when the designer is then perhaps looking at a product to use, they can automatically validate to see that the required information is actually being provided in the right format. Then if it needs changing, it can go through a formal technical submittal, or as one of the people on the round tables calls it, a technical deviation, which I think is a really interesting way of expressing it. And that then can then inform procurement schedules, maybe through to a merchant, and therefore it then starts to coordinate that information right the way through. So this sort of progressive specification evolution, validation, and then assurance is possibly the methodology that we should be following. So finally, the roundtable workshops, there's quite a few people on this call have actually contributed their intellect and knowledge to this. And we've now done this for 12 different asset types. And we've gone into some significant detail to actually identify what the subject matter experts and also the building safety managers say they need in terms of information. So that's a collection of the people that have contributed. We've had within that group different people. So, you know, for example, we've had people that are very much looking at things from an operational perspective, not a specification perspective. They're looking at things from a point of view of what do I need to do to ensure that fire door is performing. Compliance, they've got a different set of requirements, equally important, but they're different than what's needed for design or environmental or even the tenant. And the questions that we asked in the roundtables revolved around what risk does a particular asset mitigate? What do people do to assets to stop them from working? What information's needed? What tasks are needed so we can define those? The level of competency is needed to carry out those tasks, and also how should we record change? So if we look at that driven from risk, we can say, right, we've got a particular risk, which is perhaps spread of fire or spread of smoke. What's the mitigation of that? Well, compartmentation. How does compartmentation, how's that achieved? By having a series of assets that need to work in concert. So it's all very well doing an inspection of a fire door, but unless the wall it's going into is actually fit for purpose, unless the fire stopping is right, then the whole thing is going to fail anyway. So we need to look at things in this sort of, from that perspective. And therefore, we need to ensure that the assets have the right values in here to support that particular activity. So we're using this to really gain expert input to actually say what information is needed. So similarly, it might be another risk is the compromised firefighter access, and smoke control is maybe the mitigation, or the HSE call it the treatment that's needed. And exactly the same with detection or whatever. So the principal idea here is to basically organize things in that sort of structured manner. I'll just finish just by showing some of the outputs. So this is one of the outputs, and you can download these from the BIM4Housing website. We've got here an explanation of the fire door with the detail of what goes in to make that fire door. And you know, there's a lot of detail here, but it's what's needed according to the experts to ensure that they can keep that fire door safe. And we've got that level of detail for all the other asset types. The risks, so this was a long list from the round tables saying what's the risk of that a fire door mitigates. Also, what do people do to a fire door to stop it from working? Like you know, blocking it open or disconnecting the closer or painting over it. I didn't realise was an issue. And then going on to that, what information is needed? So here we've got the detail of what information is needed at high level, but also for specification, what information is needed for about the materials. And if we can get this right, then we can also use that same information from a carbon footprint perspective. We've got then construction, inspection. So then we're into tasks. So what tasks would you need to do an inspection and checking and validation? And then drilling into the detail, and we can tie this back to SFG20, for example, which is the standard maintenance regimes. And then we've got what level of competence is needed. So the competency for a fire door is going to be different than the competency for fire penetration tests, for example. And then finally, how should we track change? So we've got all of that, which is a quick resource. And then this is the information that's needed. You can perhaps give some thought as to how we could use this. This has principally been put together. So there's a step-by-step guide for a housing association, for example, to do a self-assessment of how can they pull together the information into data containers so that when they're then creating their safety case, they know what information to pull together. So we can also use this to inform the production of a digital twin. So we're creating digital containers for floors, safety, and also that might be a 2D spatial model or a 3D spatial model. But as we go through this, we've then done a checklist to see what information you need at a building level, and then at a system level. So what sort of information do we need to know about systems? At floors, then going into units, have you got a list of the UPRNs? Unique property reference numbers, that is. Then asset types. What information do we need to know about individual instances? So there's a checklist again. And then product information, procedures, what you might find in the O&M. So a checklist for your O&M to make sure that you've got, for example, fire plans in it. And then finally, the records. And we've then taken that and turned it into a Microsoft Forms. So I'm sorry if that was a bit whistle stop, but I hope that was helpful. Daz, can you pick up?
Yes, thanks, George. unless anyone had any questions on anything that George kind of presented, or shall I just kind of move forward?
I think so. If you've got any questions at all, maybe put them in the chat, and we'll come back to you. Okay.
Great. No, thanks, George. And I guess firstly, just to kind of echo George's point, really thanks for everyone's attendance and taking the time out, and also I guess more importantly, like the experience and the expertise, I guess, within this group and all the other groups. But so no, thank you for that. And just a quick intro of myself. I'm Das, or Andrew De Silva. I'm from David Miller Architects. I'm one of the directors there, leading on the kind of technical and the R&D elements. And I guess I've been there, I think, 15 years nearly, or coming up to 15 years. And a large part of our work is in the housing sector. So hopefully we're kind of well placed in terms to provide feedback on things that have worked well and haven't worked well. I'm just going to share a couple of slides, really, just to give a bit of an overview of what we did. And looking back at the dateline is a bit shocking. It was about 18 months ago or a year ago. It's kind of flown by. So let me just share that with you. Hold on a second. And I appreciate that obviously some members of the team kind of were obviously part of that team from the beginning. But one of the first things that George and Richard and sort of asked us was to kind of, for the keeping in mind that this is the designers or design working group, what was the kind of aim, or what was the kind of the thinking behind it? So we kind of came up with this sort of strap line, and you know, the kind of designers have always had to balance quality, cost, time. But obviously, more importantly, and not more importantly, I guess, added to that, we've got the sustainability, the safety, social impact, which are becoming obviously all key drivers in the development of the homes and communities that we're involved in. But obviously, to do that, the collaboration, communication, and as noted before, the right information at the right time is the thing that will underpin our ability to kind of achieve these. And so on the back of that, as George mentioned, that was kind of our kept in mind. From the seminars that George mentioned, we kind of extracted various questions from the panel and the audience. And there's a bit of work done to kind of identify which questions were specifically related to the design team, for example. So there were questions, for example, to do with, you know, what about retrofit projects, refurbishments, which is clearly very topical as well in terms of how do we know what's already been installed, for example, how do we know how to get the right surveys, for example. There were other things to do with sort of BIM and sustainability. What are the barriers to adopting BIM within organizations? You know, is that still the case? Are things like the ISO, the British standards, a bit complicated for smaller practices or even for larger ones? What is the cost benefit of using BIM for design teams, for example? There are other things to do with like modern method construction, and are they going to be, how can better information management help with that? How could they help with things like knowing exactly what's going into buildings? So having prefabricated offsite assemblies, you know, there's an element of quality assurance. You know exactly what's gone in. They've been tested thoroughly, for example. So could these be kind of beneficial things? So on the back of this bit of work, we kind of broke up and did kind of various sort of little case studies. These are a couple of ones that I was generating under the question with a couple of the other team members about. This one was links between BIM and offsite construction. So I just had a look at one or two of our projects. This was a volumetric one. And we kind of generated some questions for the other working groups, because some of the challenges in the project we couldn't solve just by us, because it might be to do with procurement, it might be to do with sort of a legal element. So that was really, but one of the benefits of it was using the digital model. We were able to, for example, just very simply put in three-dimensional pink fire stopping elements into our model, which could then be scheduled, tagged, checked on site, and checked again, checked on the factory and then checked again on site. So that was a very simple way of trying to deal with an issue of fire barriers in a volumetric scheme, for example. And we did another one to do with sort of looking at cross-laminated timber and what are the benefits and negatives of that. So that that was sort of how we kind of generated this file node, which was kind of where we kind of left it, really more to do with asking team members to almost come up with topics or issues, or sometimes solutions that they've experienced, which could be shared with the rest of the group. But again, this is something that we kind of started, but maybe it's a way for us to go forward to kind of capture ideas and topics for us to discuss, and then feed into the working groups, as George mentioned. So what I'll do at the end of the presentation is probably just share a couple of these slides, just so you have a bit of an overview of what we did. One of the things that, as a bit of a reboot, as George was showing in that slide earlier, was to kind of ask, we were kind of asked, what are the specific problems, that our group is trying to solve? And some of the things that I'm aware of, again, this vary from a designer point of view. Obviously, the work that George has showed out is amazing in terms of being able to kind of keep that golden thread of information through the process, which are all relevant. But in a way, I kind of wanted to sort of step back a little bit. And I know from the audience today and the team, there's a lot of cross-disciplinary members. So there's some designers, some specialist subcontractors, some housing association members, and some contractors, for example. And I think that's really beneficial because sometimes as designers, we sometimes overproduce information, give information which is not required, or underproduce information on other packages, for example. So I don't, and obviously, we'll, that I think that's a benefit in terms of knowing actually what information is needed when, coming back to that original kind of strap line. But simply speaking, taking sort of like the data element out of it to a little bit, one of the things that I'm experienced, I guess, is just in a kind of very simplistic form, the disjointedness of various programs from the various stakeholders can be an issue right from the start, not necessarily worrying about any of the data that might be integrated. So, for example, the client, let's say the housing association or local authority, might have quite an ambitious plan because they want to deliver a certain amount of affordable homes by a certain date, and that's politically driven as well sometimes. But then the design program and the designers program, in order to be able to coordinate, go through the planning process, etc., it just doesn't fit in. And then when you add to that the realistic construction program in terms of sequencing, decontamination maybe, or whatever it may be, also doesn't kind of add up. And finally, as George mentioned, with the new gateways coming in, the need to kind of procure specialists, some of the big specialists that impact on the design, M&E was talked about, maybe it's other things to do with facades, for example. How can we get them on board at sort of stage 2, 3, without necessarily being in a formal agreement with the ultimate client? The financial close hasn't been achieved. So so for me, the kind of overlapping of programs not aligning it's just a very simple one. But I think if we can try and talk about how we could mitigate that, that would be really good. And this, for example, this diagram is something that I presented in terms of what does BIM look like. So the various stakeholders at RIBA stage 2, 3, 4. In this particular scheme, one of the things I think that was a benefit for the design team as a whole, we were appointed to kind of employ the entire design team from stage 1 to 3 as part of the framework. So we had something like 13 consultants appointed under DMA to generate the scheme and get planning. Now, one of the very simple things that I thought was very good in the way that the local authority structured that was ensuring that we also had a QS on the team. So again, from a design point of view, RQS, we were feeding information to RQS, for example, at early stage about number of units simply. We could then obviously, that's all real time because it's with the building information model. So if we designed something with an additional floor, the schedule would change. And that enabled RQS to kind of put some rates and then compare that with the client's their QS, for example, and then that could feed into the business case. But as the detail got more and more, as we went into stage 2 and stage 3, with input from, feedback from, say, the planning consultant, local stakeholders, we could refine the amount of information that our QS had, i.e. appointed by us, to make sure that the cost of the project was being closely monitored. So, at stage 3, at planning, this is the door schedule for the scheme, and we could be very prescriptive about it. What kind of doors were there? Metal doors, timber doors, double doors, etc. So that's one example where one kind of idea that I had about is simply, can we maybe present a workflow to the clients between ourselves where it says, we think there should be a QS on the design team side, as well as the client side or the contractor side, both, so that any value engineering or product replacement or facade design, etc., can be done all before we get to planning. Now, I think that's the aim for all projects, really, but it doesn't simply, on some of the other housing schemes, the QS, for example, in the same framework, wasn't under our appointment, it was under the client's. And that simple disjoint but has the potential to kind of, for us designers to design away, but actually not have a handle on the cost, for example, of the project. And that just leads to, the need to kind of quite major refurbish, value engineering, or put NMAs in after planning, and no one really wants that. It's not very fun for anyone, and to have to kind of, one would suppose to water down a scheme, for example. So in this scheme, actually what went into planning is essentially what's about to be handed over next week, for example, and this is all like a 6-year journey that we've kind of gone through in this scheme. So those are some of the kind of, I think, stepping back a little bit from the nitty gritty of the data and nitty gritty of like maintaining that, because if we can't get us design team to work together, coordinate spatially together, and know what the cost of the project is before we submit to planning, then unfortunately things like changes of products, changes to kind of achieve the time or the program, mean that inevitably errors could be made, and the kind of sort of a degradation of information flow and kind of change management kind of comes into it, so that when you get to the end of the project, actually there's lots of things that might have been missed, or things have been changed, and that could be a safety issue, that could be a life cycle issue, because a suitable product wasn't put in place, and it kind of breaks down every so often. So that's one of the kind of key aims that I wanted to do, was just to almost kind of pare it back a little bit from data, keeping in mind that we're looking at it from a design point of view. And my experience has really been about disjointing the programs, and also then about having the right design team members to be able to make those decisions. The discussion about whether the right specialist subcontractors can be appointed early, again, sounds very simple in theory, but I appreciate the fact that, again, contractors, for example, cannot appoint specialists till they got into financial close. But again, at the moment, that only happens right at the beginning of stage 5, for example. So there's some very simple kind of shifts. And what I would like to do, and obviously more than willing to kind of understand where everyone is, but in terms of the output of the team, is to have those sort of key kind of questions, but very stripped back, almost high level. Because if we can deal with the high level, then I think we've got enough tools at the other working groups looking in super detail to kind of actually achieve those. But yeah, simply kind of agreeing that this should be the workflow. And I kind of wrote something to myself really about what is the what actions can we take which are minimal interventions into what's currently the status quo, but have the greatest impact. So, for example, that QS idea that I had, for me, seems like a very minimal intervention, but I think it has quite high impact in terms of, from design point of view, change of design, keeping the cost correct, getting the financial budgets correct, etc. So that there is less need for change management, because everyone's actually designed it once, everyone's priced it, it's affordable, and we build it. Again, sounds very simple, but I appreciate there's lots of hurdles to kind of go through that. So I'm kind of keen to understand from everyone, with their experiences, from their different specialisms, what could be the minimal things that we could do but has the greatest impact, as a general question to everyone. I think the outputs are obviously questions on to go to the working groups, working streams, but also visual outputs that we could share with other things. So if it's a bit like the program that George shared, I think that's very easy for everyone to digest. Whether it could be a video, for example, because I think it's fair to say that digital or visual outputs are very easy for people to understand. We can share them very easily, and they can be absorbed easily. And obviously the aim would be to kind of share it on the platforms that we talked about. So you've got the BIM4Housing, you got the BIM4Housing Association, everyone's individual websites, things like the B1M. So all of those platforms could be where we kind of share things. But I'm keen to kind of keep it visual, keen to kind of keep it a little bit high level initially, to find out where the problems are, and then we can dive into the detail. But that's hopefully just a bit of an overview. But like I said, I'm kind of more than happy to get various ideas from the different people. But we've got a great selection of people from different sectors and specialisms, which I think is great. I know there's been a couple of messages coming through, but if anyone's got any immediate reactions to any of that, please let us know, because you know that's what we're here for.
Let's open the floor up. Yeah,
exactly.
Jim, you had your hand up.
Well, I had a small comment about the colour chosen for fire stopping. I've got a particular thing in terms of my risk assessment hat on, of seeing pink filler placed in places where it should never be used, and you've used one a very emotive colour for me. Now, whether that's too trivial for you, but the choice of colour on a drawing that shows fire stopping at pink shows big red lines for me, but it's only, you know, a minute comment, so I apologise in advance.
We've got a couple of fire stopping experts on the group as well, so I think you might be we might be informed by Sharon or Alistair.
I would prefer red, but I'm probably a bit like Jim. I think it's easier to highlight it, but we'll go with whatever rainbow colours you choose.
Good. Right, Mark.
Thanks, George. I might be taking too much of a step back here, but I'm sort of fixating on something, so I just want to just get it out there in terms that to me that there's something very much in terms of the message that we need to send to everybody. I'm really fixating on the design program and the issues that potentially we face. It's absolutely clear there's a need for a step change in how we do things, but that means there needs to be an acceptance amongst everybody. So one of the things that I guess I'm really aware of is the need for the management, the acquisition of all this data. I totally get that, but with that comes the resource and the time to do that. And something that really rings in with that was when you look at Gateway 2, a go, no-go gateway, and what you said brought it home to me in terms of at the end of REBA 4. So when was the last time that anybody did not see an overlap between REBA 4 and REBA 5? And usually quite significant overlaps, and usually driven by funding requirements, particular requirements of the client. So I think there needs to be, we need to focus on that. There needs to be an acceptance of this elongation of the design program, but I'm fearful of a continuing pushback on something and trying to make it shorter. But actually, we need more resource and more time. So, as I say, more of an observation, but there's this message to get out there.
Yeah, one of the interesting things with that, Mark, is that the design community can't do it on their own. Neither can the construction community, and that's why I think the structure that we've got set up does allow us to put together a coherent message on that, so that we can tackle it. Because I think you're absolutely right that people, the normal public would think, well, obviously, if you're going to start building it, it's got to be completely designed. You know, what on earth? Why would anybody not do that? But of course, we all know, for the reasons that you just said, that isn't the reality of the situation, because a lot of the things can't be done until you've actually. So we need to figure out a way of doing that, and it might well be that means we do need to start looking at far simpler and more consistent and standardized, maybe offsite manufactured solutions, which therefore it might reduce your flexibility in some way, either from a cost or from a design perspective, but actually it enables you to have that bring forward that area. Mike.
Dare I bring in the horrible word procurement into this question? Because I mean, again, I think Mark's comments are wonderful. I'd love to have a greater period in design team programs for us to do more work at the front end. It would be well supported. But procurement still has a massive challenge in terms of many of the things we're talking about. I think if we had this hypothetical project in which we had the ability to have a wonderful program, the ability to capture data, and Paula put a wonderful comment about this disconnect between model producers and designers. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to pick up on as well. There's this wonderful utopian vision about being able to do everything that we can do, but typically procurement routes and program, and dare I say cost within that, possibly within one of those three, always mean that something always gets sacrificed somewhere in that line.
We do that, absolutely. Well, one of the things that we're doing is we've got another working group that's looking at things from a point of view of information quality that is being procured from the supply chains. So again, using standardization. But one of the things that we're very keen to do is to have BIM as part of procurement, because at the end of the day, unless we can actually have clear information that's actually being built into that process, and we can integrate with the tools, maybe SAP, Coins, Oracle, that are being used by procurement teams, they need to have that type of scheduled information. I'll come to you in a second, Anthony. Thomas, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just briefly, my concern is perhaps of a political nature. What I mean with that is that all the good work, which all the enthusiasm might produce, which is collectively in this group, basically to have enough impact on industry, because we are in a sense not a relevant authority, as a recognized body which has members and so forth. So we're sort of a loosely organized, dedicated a bunch of practitioners who wants to really improve the industry, while maybe the official relevant bodies may never agree on anything, which actually moves the industry forward. So what I've been thinking about most is how we can create a sort of more direct democracy system, whereby George had earlier the rifts, the treatments, these various columns. It would be great if people within this group could actually cast a vote of approval, which is public, and therefore validate our own guidance, so that relevant authorities have no other chance but eat it. So you're basically validating through your name, through your LinkedIn profile, essentially. You're voting on all the guidance we're producing, and then as a result, the relevant authorities, which are sort of spending more time on infighting than actually moving things forward, cannot avoid the output of this group any longer. It becomes unavoidable. And I think, George, you already told me about interactions you've had with such relevant authorities who said, oh, the work you're doing is great, but we should actually be doing this, but we're not. Yeah. So they will have a conflict of interest in accepting the outputs of this group, unless we make it unavoidable to be accepted. Not sure if I get my point across, but
yeah, I think you've articulated that well. Thank you, Thomas. Anthony.
Oh yeah, I'm interested in the conversation about the designers in this group and what they can do to help the problem you've described. So, from my mind, I've spent 30 years being frustrated with the same things being mentioned here. So, I worked as a designer in MEP. I worked in a contractor's MEP. I worked for a tier 1 contractor, and every time the problem is, what does the designer design for us that we need to look at a specification? Who do we have as our preferred suppliers for the products, the components, the elements we're going to build with, and get them communicating with them? So I agree with Mike, procurement is something we can't change. That's always going to be there. That is obvious to do that. Government needs to get involved with that. Frameworks, I would say. And I think the big thing that we probably do here is understand early engagement with the people that you're buying products from at the end point, who you getting it from, give that information to your designers so they're actually designing with things in mind that are actually going to be purchased, and then you refuse this switch out scenario we always get into, and the issues we've got with Grenfell and all this. We're saying, well, we changed the product, who's tracking it? This golden thread idea is great, but it starts with the designers describing, even in schedules, being accurate schedules of what you're going to do, and they are actually what's going to be procured at the end. It's all about talking to the right people early in the time frame.
Thank you, Anthony. Jarek.
Hi, everyone. I really like Thomas' comment about this politics, and I actually was thinking about something across similar lines, because I see a lot of similarity, and I know there is a connection between UK BIM framework and UK BIM Alliance and this group, but we seem to be repeating some of the work and just showing it in a different way. It would be good if we could have almost someone who have a political skills and could join that together so we can add value rather than repeat something, and then feed into each other and work a bit more together rather than reinventing the wheel, because I feel like a lot of work is being done which is repeated.
Yeah, I mean, we just to answer that, we are trying to, as you've seen, we're I'm personally anyway involved in quite a few of these different initiatives, and I'm we're very much trying to draw people in and coordinate that. So we're not we certainly don't want to in any way reinvent the wheel, right? Having said that, there's always a different perspective on things. So if, for example, you're coming at things, Jarek, from you're at the moment you're working for a contractor, aren't you? So your perspective on things will be different than maybe Joe Stott, who's just good as a designer. So that doesn't mean that we're doing something different. It's a matter of communicating. And the other challenge that we've got is there's just so much guidance out there. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. The round table sessions that we've done, we did that. We actually did that after spending 18 months trying to get information from clients to say what information did they need. So it was actually a real challenge. So that's why we've done that, so to not replicate. Paula.
Thanks, George. I agree with Mark on the design programme and Mike on the procurement programme, and having that fully integrated is really key. But just to kind of build on what they've said there, I can see that there's a bit of a three-pronged approach. So the first is that we've got to go to our clients, we've got to educate our clients and say, look, in the current climate, there's always going to be an elongation of the programme. So contractors have to work together on this and be united. We need to complete a certain level of stage 4 detail and a certain number of important CDP packages before we can even start on site, and that's going to impact the programme. And if we don't educate our clients, they'll just insist on us rushing through stage 4 and trying to solve the problems in stage 5, which is kind of what we do now under a design and build anyway. So that's the first prong. The second prong is taking it back to a building block mentality, and Mark will laugh at this, but the Lego mentality that we always used to talk about. Start with the building blocks of compliant systems, compliant solutions that we can build the design around. I know the designers on this call will say that that suppresses creativity, and it does to some extent, but let's start with getting the key things right and build the solution around those things that we know will mitigate key risks and allow easier sign off in stage 4. And the third thing is speaking more with our supply chain and empowering them to come to the table with solutions that then form part of those building blocks and inform the design and the procurement program. So we're thinking about what usually happens kind of back into stage 4 much earlier on in the process. And to me, if we get those 3 things right, it starts to come together. But it's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, just building on that, one of the things I always thought was mad was when I came across M&E installation in a void where, because of the way the packages had been procured, the suspended ceiling was installed before the M&E was put in. And the reason for that was that the main contractor couldn't get the client to recognise the fact that the program was going to have to slip a little bit because the M&E contractor wasn't able to put their kit in at that stage. So rather than the suspended ceiling contractor being given a buy, they put it in and then got paid to take it down again to put the M&E in. Now, the madness of that is just crazy, but it's being driven through procurement. And Daz gave me an example last year of how they're having to redesign layouts, because when the sprinkler systems are then brought in, it meant fundamentally they could change, or they would change, the layout of the apartments. So therefore, if the sprinkler people could have been procured earlier in the process, it would have saved a lot of wasted effort by Daz taking it up. Do you want to just speak to that for a moment, Daz?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess in that particular instance, it was on the Parsons North scheme, which I guess was driven by the events of Grenfell, really. So in that particular scenario, and that M&E call was the right thing to do, and it had pros and cons, really, because you could generate probably more flat value because they can be more open plan, etc. But obviously, nonetheless, had to do the design change. But it's, I think, just reading the comments, Sharon, you made a good point as well. And Paul, I think completely agree that it's just about being honest with each other, including the client, because I see a lot of the time where the program is agreed and you know well in advance that it's never going to work, but everyone is doggedly saying, yes, we're still on program. Yes, we're still on program. And unsurprisingly, the project is like 6 months or a year late, and having to be done. And you see this happening every time. I think that was sort of Anthony, I think you mentioned that you see the same sort of car crash happening year after year after year. So I think the solutions that were mentioned and the ideas, maybe, again, in my simplistic view, that like a quick overlay or a bar diagram of what we think should happen, a bit like what George's and the other team are doing with the gateway overlay. My big thing, and I think procurement has to change as I think more aligned to what you were saying as well, Paula, where the contractors have to take some decisions, financial decisions, clients have to agree on them and just stick with it and just keep going, unless something massively changes. Otherwise, if you do want to continuously try and eke out costs or whatever, that's when the non-holistic value engineering, 5-6 months down the line, you forget, oh, that's why we had that element in the building, but someone's just forgotten about it, and when you come to actually getting it tested, it doesn't work. So I think there is an element of just try and design once, procure it once, and then deliver it. Again, sounds very simple, and I understand there's lots of reasons why that can't happen, But I don't think we should not try and start with that as the model. And the gateways actually are probably a blessing in disguise, because it allows everyone, including the client and all the teams, to kind of focus on that point, and make the decisions and then go forward. And maybe the innovations from is the thing that's going to drive the competitiveness of the schemes. That's always been the case. You know, if you're more innovative or you're quicker at doing something or better, then you're going to, succeed, I guess. And some people will fall away from that, but that is unfortunately part of the life, I guess.
Thank you, Daz. Matt.
Thanks, George. Just following on from what Anthony said previously, really, one of the challenges that we face is this seemingly ever-increasing mentality of leaving detailed design to further down the process, and there's a sort of comparison of appointment of specialist trade contractors in relation to that. So without that early engagement, quite often by the time the specialist trade contractor is appointed, there is limited scope to change some of the items that are then bound to be requiring change. And as I'm sure we're all aware, the later in the process a design change is introduced, the more it costs, the more difficult it is to implement. And but the issue we have is that the contractual side of the process doesn't really marry up well to the design side of the process. So we constantly find ourselves with site-related issues, which then result in delays, which result in reworking that could have been sorted out had they been recognised earlier in the process, but because of the way we're currently working, haven't been. So, and this impacts on even things like wastage. And just going on Mike's comments earlier relating to procurement. You and I, George, spoke previously about the benefit of with plasterboard in cut size boards. Now, this is something that I've been speaking to a number of QSs about, and there are advantages to doing it. Why don't we do it more? And the responses that I've got back have all been very similar in the fact that there is absolutely an advantage to using items like cut size boards to reduce wastage, to reduce cost, to increase or decrease installation time, etc. However, the lead-in times on materials are quite lengthy at present anyway, and on cut size boards it just makes it completely unrealistic. Now, if that could be implemented earlier in the process, therefore we knew the quantity of boards, we knew what size they were going to be right from stage 3, then that could be more easily procured when it came to the contractor being appointed and actually involved with the project. But it requires a bit of work in relation to the contractual process, the appointment of the contractor and the early engagement with the specialist trade contractors in order to sort of implement that, really.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things, Matt, that you've taught me is the importance of the tolerances of the elements that it's then butting against, because it's all very well getting cut size boards, but if the construction itself, I think you explained to me about the slab and the fact that a 5 or 10 mil variance can basically undermine the whole process. And from a construction point of view, we're probably not creating the accuracy that's actually needed for offsite manufacturing or pre-cut boards to actually be used. That's right, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing a bit of further progression with that, funnily enough. And one of the specialist trade contractors we work with, who have considerable emphasis on quality assurance and who really are interested in finding any faults with their work before anyone else does. Basically, it costs them less to find their own faults and correct them than them to be found later in the process. recently gave me a figure on head deflection defects, and they had recorded that up to 65% of the head deflection detail installed on a certain job were defective.
Yeah.
And that's due to things like board overlap, all the studs being cut the same length, all the boards being cut the same length. Because if you've got guys putting, I mean, dry lining goes up at an alarming rate if you're not accustomed to seeing the speed of installation. The studs aren't all being cut to independent lengths; they're all cut to the same length for the height of wall, and then the boards are going in. And ultimately, if you've got a slab with plus or minus 25 millimeters tolerance, I've had on a project recently, that's quite an amount for the dry lining system to accommodate, and the manufacturer's detail just won't accommodate that amount of deflection of standard or tolerance. Sorry.
Yes, thanks very much, Matt. Yeah, you see why we've got these experts on the group as well, so sharing their practical experience as well. Paul, I think you were next. Paul Connolly.
How you doing? So from my point of view, in trying to get that flow of information from design all the way through to the end, and Paul has mentioned it, you know, having that block of information continuing on with it. All of this talks about a procurement model. You know, there's inferences of different procurement models, whether that's a procurement model for design or main contractor or subcontractor. It's all about cost and program. And when you look at the CDP, or as Ribba says, the specialist parts of design in stage 4, which always overlap into stage 5, is trying to get that product and that CDP taken away so the design team are supported by those people and do it in that design stage so you can follow those blocks through. Because at the moment what happens is, if you look at a procurement model, it's very transactional. Yeah, client comes along, appoints a designer, designer's professional team comes along, appoints a main contractor, appoints a subcontractor appoints CDP specialist, whether that's dry lining or whether that's roofs or whether that's M&E. It's all a transactional model, and that flow of information gets very lost all the way along the way because it's all about risk and program. Yeah, so as a group, if you could understand that CDP more and push it that way instead of that way, pushing it further down the line, yeah, in a more collaborative approach, the flow of information should work a lot better. The problem is, if you look at CDP from when we were working in the old F1A days, CDP to what there is now, there's a lot more CDP. You know, so if you take that element and how we can, that will always help the flow of information. That come the end, the asset, the residential asset of what we got in that building, you will know exactly what it is in terms of carbon, embedded and operational, and you'll always know what there is fire risk from my point of view and acoustics. So that's really, you know, one where that internally here we're trying to look at how we improve that, working with design teams to say, well, CDP, do we bring them along in stage 2 and stage 3, yeah, instead of later? So that was the bit I was really looking at.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. Mike.
Just trying to think of a way in which a lot of these conversations can be sort of brought and moved forward. A lot of conversations in text down the side have all come back to something called the BEP. And I don't think any conversation I've heard so far isn't something that shouldn't or could be easily captured in a BEP. But actually, what we still regularly see is BEPs are still seen as this bolt-on to other contractual documents. There's this whole suite of documents, and then within Appendix F, there's some BEP document that's been included, where actually the BEP would solve many of the conversations that we are talking about today if they are. I mean, Jarek's put some wonderful comments in the side about how they're not actually in the right place at the right time, they're not updated, but actually their whole function is to do all the things we're doing. So as a group, is there anything we could do to push that forward?
That sounds good to me. I guess the question is, is there such a thing as a standardized BEP? It would be good to arrive at that, wouldn't it?
I'll be interested to see, but my experience of BEPs is that they come in all shapes and sizes. Some great, some absolutely terrifying, some to the right level of information. But what's interesting is when you go on to things like the UK BIM framework, they don't actually give you a good example of a framework or a BEP. There is some standards up there, but actually the development of a more user-friendly BEP, I think, would help a lot of it.
Okay, that's good. It'd be good to look at that. Jarek.
Sorry. Well, as it happens, I'm currently working on my thesis for building information management, and I collected quite a few BIM execution plans. BIM execution. Jesus, I forgot my words. Anyway, so I collected quite a few from various companies from UK. They shared with me. Obviously, I can't share the details, but I'm going to analyze them once I have a time, and I'm happy to share my findings. That may help, I hope. This is the objective of my research, by the way. So I'm happy to share it, and hopefully we can learn from it. So I've got quite a few of them. I think about 12 from various UK biggest contractors.
Would the group here, would you be willing to share BEPS as long as you know, that could be a work stream, couldn't it, Daz? We could actually say, right, this is a good example, really, isn't it? We could actually say, right, the data work stream, or indeed we could set up a specific activity for looking at BEPS. Would people be interested in engaging in that?
Yeah, because I think we're kind of going through like the ISO accreditation at the moment, and I think the British standard and the ISO contain almost content that has to be in a BEP, but it's a fine balance, isn't it? They don't want to be kind of, here's a template and everyone use it, but also but they need to make sure that everyone captures certain fundamental bits of information or processes in a BEP. So I think that's what I think, Mike, you've seen, is that there is guidance in the ISO and I guess at BF, but how people interpret it. And I think this is maybe one of the things that came up about in the very original about adoption of BIM in that sense, is because of the various sort of acronyms and semantics, which are hard to kind of fathom sometimes. People get a little bit lost in them. So that's, again, on a simple level, I think it'd be useful to share and pick good things and bad things. The idea of a live BEP makes absolute sense because it is evolving. It should evolve as different parties come on board, for example. So I think that is a good work stream to follow through on, George. Agreed. And then I don't know, another idea that I had, I'm conscious of time as well, is again, maybe because there are so many different organizations, individuals who have got lots of different interests in the process of building a project, designing and building a project, would it make sense for us to, I don't know, almost kind of one thing or a couple, if you have it, that would make your lives better, or you think is something that should change in the way that we currently, because maybe something we could overlap onto like just a digital whiteboard about RIBA stages and say, well, if you're a specialist, actually one thing that would make a huge difference to yourselves is this. Appreciate that early engagement is probably the kind of thing that everyone says, but apart from early engagement, what would be the next thing that would make a huge difference to you, Matt, for example, or to you, Anthony, or to you, Paula, etc. So that I'm just thinking maybe that could be something that we do as in advance of next meeting, just one or two things that you would change, and Gateway 2 could be the very good focal point for us. And what would we need to do to change the current way that we work, however hypothetically it may be, to get to stage Gateway 2 with the right information, and then we could kind of compare and contrast those to build a sort of another overlap on. So I'm conscious that lots of people are doing RIBA work stage overlaps, but me, the Gateway 2 seems like a really good focal point. Because
so Daz, moving forward, are you thinking to have like a specific focus subject for each meeting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think after this one, I think it'd be good for it's a call to arms of ideas. So I could share, like I said, the little template that I created for people to provide their ideas. So it's a little bit more structured, which might help us, hopefully. But initially, I think maybe the kind of the homework almost, or thinking hats on, is, yeah, what could we change? And if you know what the discipline is of each individual or the organization, then we could kind of bring that together again.
You could then make a decision, couldn't you? And then set up a subject for the next meeting.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like I said, I'll share the little template that I did, and hopefully that will help. But I mean, some of the ideas already shared are great.
Sure.
I think we have to think a little bit unconventionally. If it does mean changing things a lot, well, it means we had to change everything. But otherwise, I think we had to kind of challenge and disrupt the current system. If we feel that that's actually going to enable us to achieve Gateway 2, meet the building safety bill requirements, etc. Because that is a real challenge that we're all facing pretty much now, I guess.
Daz, we've just got a few minutes left. Thank you for that. That's great. Jarek.
Yes.
You got your hand up.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. What I was. So let me take that off. What I was gonna say, just going back to the BEPS. I started typing it in. So if you would like, if you can share some ISO 19650 BEPS with me, that would only help to basically analyze the data. It would be more representative for the general construction industry. I would really appreciate that, and I'm happy then to share my finding. Obviously, without the data, I cannot share. But
yes.
Yeah, I would really welcome that.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
Just a quick one. I fully support what Matt says, because when you are calling in specialist contractors, specifically for the three fields that I'm involved with, which is emergency lighting, fire alarms, and for signing and signs, I agree with Paula in the three things that she would like to try to do, and that's talk to clients about getting some of these packages and meeting some of these risks as a yes, no, do you want this? Because obviously, as a standard developer, I work on the application standards for all of these standards. We try to give choices in those standards, which makes it very difficult to put a specification forward as a bolt-on for this or that particular type of housing. You know, the needs of the disabled have to be considered on an individual basis, and we need some dialogue in there. I just wanted to show my support to Matt and to Paula on the things that she was saying, is that these discussions need to be front end within the design side of things.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether there's some if you like, modules that British Standards could work on in developing a standard specifically for very clear types of developments, specifically both in the speculation side, because you know, the problem with developing speculation projects is that nobody knows who's going to go into them, and therefore you can't decide all of these things. And of course they do impinge on fire stopping and all the rest. So from that type of thing, it is very much for me to support the designers, because as an application standards developer, I can look at that and say, well, yes, we should have a standard specifically for this type of application, because it's got a huge number of needs. So that's what I would put in the melting pot.
Thanks. That's great, Jim. Thank you. Eduardo.
Hi, George. It's just a comment on your presentation. You raised there the fact that fire rating is not a standard parameter on COBie, and then it goes with other ones like acoustic rating and many others that should be part of the standard. So presumably it's been done manually, and this just doesn't go along with the golden thread. So it feels like we should have parameters on COBie reviewed, and then it's just this big push. Who do you need to reach Is it Autodesk or is it part of a big organization? Should it be UK BIM Alliance? But I feel strongly that the parameters and the general shape of COBE should be reviewed.
Okay, so just pick up on that. Perhaps right. It's not about COBE. COBE is just the information exchange format. Yeah. The attributes, things like fire rating, fire integrity, and things, they are completely accommodated within COBE. Yeah. It's just a matter of you have to require them, because the attributes for different asset types are different. So we can pick up on that later, Eduardo. But
it's a very technical question.
Yeah, it is, but it's something. Anthony, we've only got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be really fast. Just picking up what Eduardo said. So the idea what you're talking about at the property level is you're talking about fire rating. This is where we look at the idea of generic design properties. So something high level. And then as you move through design to construction, you go to specific properties that the manufacturers use. So happy to talk to you about that or share with the group how that works. But you start off with generic. Fire rating could be generic, but then fire rating becomes something else. There's links to other properties. It's how simple you make your first statement as a designer, but there's loads of work going on in the industry around that.
Good. Okay. Well, I've really enjoyed this session. I hope that you found it useful. Daz, do you want to just polish us off?
Yeah, just say massive thank you for everyone. And like I said, I'll share some of those slides and the template after this as well. If you could provide any ideas, that'd be great. And then we can then kind of set the agenda for the next meeting. But no, just say thank you very much.
Yeah, and if you're interested in participating in any of the other working groups, then they're obviously open to you. So we'll keep you informed. But otherwise, this will happen again in 2 months' time. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.